Welcome to our series called Passion. And we've been studying how the Old Testament sacrifices help to focus the passion of the Israelites on God. I have a deep appreciation for great advertising. And every once in a while, there's one of these great advertisements that's really well done. There's this one advertisement where there's this man standing in his bathrobe, in his bathroom, looking into the mirror, talking to himself, and he says to himself, "It wasn't that long ago I was a king." And then the camera jumps into the bedroom where the woman is slipping out of bed and into her slippers, and she stops and she gazes into the distance and she says, "I was a queen and not to be woke before 9 a.m. And we end up following this couple through the day, each reminiscing in various ways about how good life had been as royalty. What we find out is they just finished up a vacation where they had a great time and they felt important, well taken care of, and they enjoyed their time just relaxing and being pampered. You know, the whole advertisement never asks you to call them or sign up. All they do is they flash the information at the end of the commercial, and they expect that because people like to be pampered, they're gonna call. You know, we do love to be pampered, don't we? Right now, the kids are on vacation, and maybe you're even working from home, but you probably don't feel pampered. You don't necessarily feel like a king or a queen or a prince or a princess. Life isn't ideal right now. We don't necessarily feel the love, the joy, the peace of God in our lives. And we want to talk about that today. You might have some anxiety about the COVID-19 virus and all the news coverage and everybody talking about it and everybody trying to adjust to a new way of life because of it. And so our lives aren't necessarily stress-free. We're not necessarily relaxed and pampered right now. But imagine a life where you are pampered, you are treated like royalty, where life is just free and relaxed, and you enjoy your time, and you do feel the love, joy, and peace of God in your life right now. For the Jews, the Sabbath was to represent that kind of day when everything got set aside, all the busyness, all the cares that got all put down, and their whole focus was to spend that day focused only on God and the other relationships in their life. And so we're going to study the fellowship offering, which is really closely connected with the Sabbath. But first, let's start at Deuteronomy chapter 5. We'll start at verse 12. And if you have your Bible, open it up. Take a look. We'll be reading it in just a minute. So in Deuteronomy chapter 5, we're going to find the 10 Commandments. And there's 10 sections where God is giving instructions to the Israelites on how to live. One of the big commands, one of the top 10, is the concept of the Sabbath. And God had very specific rules for what the Sabbath was about and how it was to look. So let's look at that. Deuteronomy chapter 5, starting at verse 12. God says, "Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your ox, nor your donkey, or any of your animals, nor the alien within your gates, so that your manservant and maidservant may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day." You know, out of the 10 Commandments, that commandment comes with the most detail and the most instructions. In other words, God really cared about how they lived the Sabbath. And so, the primary reason for why God cared is that it's a reminder of what God had done. It says, "Remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out with amazing power and mighty deeds. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day." So the reason for the Sabbath was to remind them about how they had been freed from slavery, and it also reminded them of a future day when they would be freed from the slavery of everyday work. And they would spend the rest of their lives in the presence of God, not doing work, but living as royalty. Wouldn't that be great? To get rid of all the hustle, all the bustle, all the chaos, all the work that has to be done, and instead just spend time doing your favorite hobby, connecting with people, enjoying life. That is what the Sabbath is all about, and that is what the fellowship or the peace offering is all about. So we're going to study the peace offering today. We're going to look into it and understand the symbolism of what it meant to the Israelites, and we're going to understand how that fits into our lives today. Well, we often use our family time or vacation time to hang out, connect with family, maybe do something fun, travel somewhere. But sometimes we end up going faster and working harder than we do in everyday life. Sometimes we have to go back to work to rest up after our vacation. We go so fast, and we do so many things, and we get overwhelmed. So, this is to remind us to slow down. And you might be wondering, like, how does Deuteronomy 5 and the fellowship offering connect with this whole thing of what's happening now with COVID-19? And we're going to answer that question in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, starting at verse 17. So if you'd look that up, that'd be great. 1 Chronicles chapter 21, starting at verse 1. I assure you, COVID-19 is not the first pandemic to ever happen. We've not experienced anything like this before in our lives. But other pandemics have happened. And in fact, the story that we're about to read has a pandemic. And it attacks the Israelites. And if you think back, there's a number of pandemics that happen. Just think of the plagues that hit Egypt. There was the plague that killed the livestock. That was the 5th plague. The 6th plague was the plague that killed or put boils on the people of Egypt. And the final plague of Egypt was when the firstborn died. So pandemics have happened. And it isn't that God isn't in control. It's that he wants to do something good in our lives. Sometimes he has to get our attention. So there's a pandemic that actually happens in 1 Chronicles chapter 21. So let's read it. 1 Chronicles chapter 21, we'll start at verse 1. Satan rose up against Israel and incited David to take a census of Israel. So David said to Joab and the commanders of the troops, "Go and count the Israelites from Beersheba to Dan. Then report back to me so that I may know how many there are." But Joab replied, "May the Lord multiply his troops 100 times over. My lord the king, are they not all my lord's subjects? Why does my lord want to do this? Why would he bring guilt on Israel?" The king's word, however, overruled Joab. So Joab left and went throughout Israel and then came back to Jerusalem. Joab reported the number of the fighting men to David. In all Israel, there were 1,100,000 men who could handle a sword, including 470,000 in Judah. But Joab did not include Levi and Benjamin in the numbering because the king's command was repulsive to him. This command was also evil in the sight of God, and so he punished Israel. Then David said to God, I have sinned greatly by doing this. Now I beg you, take away the guilt of your servant. I've done a very foolish thing. The Lord said to Gad, David's seer, go and tell David, this is what the Lord says. I'm giving you 3 options. Choose one of them for me to carry out against you. So Gad went to David and said to him, this is what the Lord says. Take your choice. 3 years of famine, 3 months of being swept away by your enemies with their swords overtaking you, or 3 days of the sword of the Lord, days of plague in the land with the angel of the Lord ravaging every part of Israel. Now then, decide how I should answer the one who sent me. David said to Gad, I'm in deep distress. Let me fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is very great, but do not let me fall into the hands of men. So the Lord sent a plague on Israel, and 70,000 men of Israel fell dead. And God sent an angel to destroy Jerusalem. But as the angel was doing so, the Lord saw it and was grieved because of the calamity, and said to the angel who was destroying the people, enough, withdraw your hand. The angel of the Lord was then standing at the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. David looked up and saw the angel of the Lord standing between heaven and earth with a drawn sword in his hand extended over Jerusalem. Then David and the elders, clothed in sackcloth, fell face down. David said to God, was it not I who ordered the fighting men to be counted? I am the one who sinned and has done wrong. These are but sheep. What have they done? O Lord my God, let your hand fall upon me and my family, but do not let this plague remain on your people. Clearly, the Lord was warning David and the people, this is not what I want you to do. Don't count the troops. Don't put your trust in what you can see. Put your trust in me. And so David goes against all of this. He counts the troops as a way to stroke his pride and to give him assurance that if he ever had to go to war, he would have the manpower to do it. Well, even David's general, Joab, is repulsed by this whole thing. Joab warns him, and still David goes forward. Once David realizes that he's done wrong, Gad comes to him, his prophet, his seer, and says, okay, so God's going to punish you. You can choose which way you want to do it. And David's response is, well, the one thing that I don't want is for an army to come in here and to take me as a hostage, as a captive. And so God chooses the plague route. And God's making a statement here. He's telling David, well, you know, you've put your faith in having lots of people at your command to protect you. And you need to move away from that kind of thinking and instead put your focus on me. Look what I can do to your army, these people that you have faith in. Look what I can do to that in a matter of 3 days. And so there's this plague that's ravaging all of Israel, wiping them out. And the people can even see this angel of death moving through Israel, and it comes to this threshing floor right next to Jerusalem. And God says, stop. You know, I think to myself, it's easy to let our passions call us away from God. And it's important to check our passions and to check where we're getting distracted, where we're moving away from God. And so we need to be careful to direct our passions in ways that please God and are healthy for us spiritually, emotionally, even physically. We need to keep our passions in check. So right now, we're forced to set aside some of our passions because of a pandemic. We're all locked away in our homes and hiding away from this virus. And it forces us to quit running around doing all kinds of other things. And this is actually a great opportunity to start assessing how we're living our lives and what it is that we're passionate about. What's distracting us from God? So what are our passions? Where are we spending our time? Where are we spending our money? What are we running off and doing? And how are we with those passions? Are we okay with what we're doing? Or do we need to redirect our passions in another way? For instance, towards God. Well, David begins to take action when he sees this angel of death coming. And let's look and see what David does next. This is starting at verse 18. Then the angel of the Lord ordered Gad to tell David to go up and build an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. So David went up in obedience to the word that Gad had spoken in the name of the Lord. While Araunah was threshing wheat, he turned and saw the angel. His 4 sons who were with him hid themselves. Then David approached, and when Araunah looked and saw him, he left the threshing floor and bowed down before David with his face to the ground. David said to him, "Let me have the site of your threshing floor so that I can build an altar to the Lord, that the plague on the people may be stopped. Sell it to me at the full price." Araunah said to David, "Just take it. Let my lord the king do whatever pleases him. Look, I'll give the oxen for the burnt offerings and the threshing sledges. Try to say that 3 times fast. The threshing sledges for the wood and the wheat for the grain offering. I will give you all of this." But King David replied to Araunah, "No, I insist on paying the full price. I will not take for the Lord what is yours, or a sacrifice for a burnt offering that cost me nothing." So David paid Araunah 600 shekels of gold for the site. Then David built an altar to the Lord there and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. He called on the Lord, and the Lord answered him with fire from heaven on the altar of the burnt offering. So David's army and the whole country are being wiped out right in front of David's eyes. They can see the angel of death as he's moving through the country. And he comes to this point where he stops right by Araunah's land. David purchases the land to do burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, or peace offerings, which is what we'll be focusing on today. And it wasn't until God began to destroy what David was passionate about that David all of a sudden began to check his passions and look for a new passion to focus on. And so David's passions have shifted. Now he's really taking God seriously. There's something about pain. There's something about difficulty that reminds us that God is there and that he wants us to be passionate about him. This is a great opportunity for us to check our passions and to understand the other things that get in the way. Well, Araunah says, you know what? Here, you can just have the land, you can just have the oxen, you can just have the wood from my threshing equipment, and we'll just build a fire and we'll do this. And David goes like, no, I have to pay full price for this. And I think this is such an amazing quote. He says, no, I insist on paying what it's worth. I cannot take what's yours and give it to the Lord. I will not offer a burnt offering that costs me nothing. Yeah. Sometimes we don't show any passion for God because we aren't willing to offer something that actually costs us something. So, the process of sacrifice is really the process of building our passion by giving something till it's painful. And that's how the plague affected David and Israel. It wasn't that God was angry and vengeful. No, God was actually reaching out to David and all of Israel, calling them back to himself and back to a relationship with him. He's trying to get their attention. C.S. Lewis was a great writer, wrote incredible books, and he was an incredible philosopher. He says this, I love this quote. He says, "Pain insists on being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks in our consciences, but he shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world." Yeah. Have we fallen deaf to God? Is pain his way of trying to rouse us and awaken us as deaf people? Well, David had become deaf towards God. Maybe we have too. In the past, we've always had faith in science. Science has fixed everything. And let's face it, our faith is still in science. We're investing every penny possible, every person possible to try to fix this using science. Well, in this particular case with David, there was an interesting byproduct of the pain that the Israelites experienced, of the pain that David experienced. When David purchased this land, he ended up purchasing the land that the future temple of Israel would rest on. This land would be the home of the temple. And so sometimes the difficulties that God puts us through have a much bigger meaning than what we even expect, what we even know. And that was certainly true then. It says that David offered both burnt offerings and fellowship offerings to the Lord that day. The burnt offerings were for sin. Last week in our service, we talked about the burnt offerings and how people went through a process of bringing in their animal, having it bled out, putting the animal on the altar, and then burning the animal until it was burnt to ashes. And it was a way of placing God first, of putting their passion on God. It says that David not only offered burnt offerings for his sin, but he also offered fellowship offerings. And the fellowship offerings are a little different. It starts out the same. You bring in an animal, or another peace offering or fellowship offering could be a grain, some other food, but you would bring it into the temple and you would bring it into the priest. If it was an animal, he would go through that same process that he did with the burnt offering. He would first slice the animal's neck, and he would bleed it out into a bowl, and then he would have the blood. And the blood he would splatter against the sides of the altar, and then he would come back, and he would join you in slaughtering the animal, taking off the hide, emptying out the guts. And it says that with the fellowship offering, the kidneys and the fat around the kidneys would go into the sacrificial altar, and that would be burnt. And here's where it goes a little bit different. Instead of burning the rest of the animal would then be prepared for a meal. Follow me. So the fellowship offering, or the peace offering, was intended to be a meal with God at the temple. In fact, they would even prepare the meal right at the temple to hang out with friends, family, and to enjoy the presence of God. So what happens to us sometimes is we get so busy doing things, running around, chasing this, chasing that, that we don't have time to really spend time even with family, friends, especially with God. So we're busy, we're running around, and we don't have fellowship. We don't hang out. And so the, shall I say, advantage of the situation that we're in right now is that we can actually take the time to sit, be with people, be with the ones that we really love. Because oftentimes we're running around, we're away from home, we go faster and faster, our anxiety goes up because it's all about getting something done. It's all about hurrying. There is no sense of Sabbath in our lives. And maybe one of the things we can learn from the whole COVID virus is that we can sit down and have a time of peace together. So instead of rushing and rushing, hurrying, doing all kinds of things to the point where we're exhausted and we just sit down in front of the TV because we can't even think anymore, we could just sit and actually enjoy a meal with each other and invite God into that fellowship. You know, I was thinking about it. The fellowship offering is like the great-great-grandfather of the church potluck. And we can't have potlucks right now, but we can be at home hanging out with our family, taking time off to be together. God wanted to remind the Israelites that the Sabbath was all about them being slaves in Egypt, that they were brought out by his power and by his might, that he wants a relationship with them. He wants to sit down and have a meal with them and experience them, and for us to experience him. Sometimes we become slaves to our busyness, slaves to all the things that have to get done. What if we were to take the time to just sit down, be together, and invite Jesus to be with us? I have to admit, I love potlucks. I love that everybody brings something and you can go down the line and take a little of this and a little of that, and pretty soon you've got a heaping full plate. And then there's all these friends and family around you. You're hanging out together, you're enjoying each other. It's a big party. But like I said, now is not the time for potlucks, but it is the time for intimate, connected meals together. Meals are our opportunity to hang out together, to laugh together, cry together, share our hopes and dreams, and really connect heart to heart. There's something intimate about doing a meal together, where you really, you stop and you talk, you share the good parts of your day, you share the bad parts of your day. There's that sense of connectedness where you're enjoying something that's filling your stomach, but it's also filling your heart. And so, I encourage you to use this time to actually sit down, have a meal together, enjoy being together, and invite Jesus into your meal. Invite him to be a part of it and to interact with you and talk about him, pray to him. Use this opportunity to make this a life habit. And I hope you enjoy.